Hey, want to take a walk on the wild side and experience the bleeding edge of technology? Then get ready, because it doesn't get much more edgy than this. You're in for a wild... Tired of boring specials about history, science, and technology? Then get on your best headphones, because you might want to lay down for this. A Sovryn Tech special with the world's foremost anarchist technophile, Brian Sovryn. He has a huge, well, you know. And now, here's Brian.
That's right, the Golden Stallion here for you, the libertine-in-chief, the Stefano de Mira of liberty, the second guiltiest pleasure. Boy, am I going through them all or what, huh? Anyway, I am not the guiltiest pleasure in liberty. I think that title belongs to Puke and the Gang, quite frankly. I mean, wow. the people they can get on there and the shit that they'll say, it is amazing. Anyway, I'm not here to plug another podcast. I'm here to talk about mine. I promised this audio for a few weeks. The audio you're about to hear is from the Texas Bitcoin conference that I went to in the beginning of March and spoke at. I already did the wrap up for that, but I said, there was some great audio. We didn't know if Let's Talk Bitcoin was going to play it or not, but we had this great roundtable discussion with the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and also myself, of course, the Golden Stallion, the Trixie of Technology, Paige Peterson, and the John Connor of Bitcoin, Justus Ranvier, one of the smartest guys I know. I'm not kidding. He is a genius. I love the man. He's awesome. Okay. So it was just a great panel, or not, it wasn't even a panel, great roundtable discussion. It was just, we were all hanging out in the hotel room, doing what we do and whatever that means. And we talked about, some pretty far out subjects, talked a lot about software standards, the future of Bitcoin, the future of decentralization, all kinds of things. It was just a great topic, and I didn't want this audio to get lost, and I wanted to make sure it got some play and it got out for people to hear. Now, of course, remember, this audio is at least a month old. This is getting released in April, literally probably a month from when it was recorded. So maybe some of people's opinions have changed now. Some of mine may have slightly changed. Who knows? But either way, just great minds together in a hotel room. Great stuff is going to come out of them. So take a listen. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll just let this run to the end. I won't have any closing comments, and just because, quite frankly, I enjoyed the shit out of this. So I hope you enjoy too. And of course, this is part of the double load that you're getting, because I'm going to be going away. Myself and the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy will be going to the Inside Bitcoin conference in New York. We will do a wrap-up special for that for Sovryn Tech afterwards. And we're going to the Bitcoin Expo in Toronto that almost literally the day after that, we'll be going to Toronto to catch that. And I can't wait for that. We will definitely do a very special wrap-up for that one, because I think that's maybe the premier event, Bitcoin event of the year. So really looking forward to that. So, you get at least a double load every time I go away. So you've got this episode, you've got the regular episode that's going to be coming out directly after this. And then Friday, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to upload episode 69 next week. And of course, I have the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy on that for me. How could I not have her on for episode 69? But I'm going to try and upload that from Toronto. So that'll be out probably on Friday instead of Saturday, just to make sure everything works out fine. So enjoy this special, just a nice, good, almost an hour-long conversation that we had a lot of fun with. And I hope you do too. And I'll see you in the next episode, episode 68, and then get ready for episode 69, baby.
Hello, this is some kind of bonus podcast. I don't know exactly what it's going to be for or where it's going to go, but hey, we'll decide. We're anarchists, right? And that's okay. So we're in, this is right after the Texas Bitcoin conference. We are in my hotel room, the place where everyone wants to be. And I'm Stephanie, and with me is Brian
Hello.
Sovryn, and Paige Peterson.
Hello.
And Justus Ranvier.
Hello, Stephanie.
Hello. Everybody speak kind of loud because we're a little far away from the mic. So We just finished recording a wrap-up show for the Texas Bitcoin Conference for Let's Talk Bitcoin. I love the sound effects, like everyone moving closer. We just finished recording a wrap-up show for Let's Talk Bitcoin, and I wanted to do like a super anarchist edition of the wrap-up show and talk about some of the things that we didn't get to talk about because we only had limited time. Andreas was on the way to the airport, and some of the things that we might not get a chance to talk about since we're not all in the same room, usually. So, Justus, you got a blog, Bitcoinism, which I love. Where did you come up with the name, by the way?
I was trying to think of a Bitcoin word that had not been taken yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, at least you didn't just pervert, take bit or coin and then stick it on another word and call it a company. Because, those are so difficult to remember and keep straight. Yeah. Bitcoinism is it almost like the religion of Bitcoin or the belief of Bitcoin?
It's when I have a rant that's too long for a forum post, or when I want to reach a different audience, and I throw it up there and promote it to Twitter, Reddit, whatever I can, just to make sure certain point of views are making it into the public sphere, because there's so much crap that's coming out over the blogosphere, over the mainstream media. I want there to be an opposing voice to some of these ideas, because otherwise they'll just win by default.
Right, and that can be an exhausting endeavor, but I'm glad that you do it, because you do it really well.
But like I said, it's only when I build up a really good rant that I just can't avoid writing is when an article comes out. I've tried to do more articles, but I'm just not feeling, I guess, when I don't really feel like this has to go out now, the articles, they stay in drafts forever. But when there's something really immediate comes out, like the most recent article was the push for, I was talking about the coming push for regulation justified by the Mt. Gox failure. And so I put out my thoughts on that, which are not exactly complimentary towards the regulators and the people who push for regulation.
I would say that's an understatement.
Probably just...
Yeah, and Paige, you are really interested in decentralized networks, and tell me more about that.
So in general, currently I work for Open Garden, which is mesh networking technology for Android devices, but I'm also really interested in just the general decentralized technology field, which is what got me interested in Bitcoin in the first place. I'm looking into different opportunities to help with these projects, including the Free Cities initiative. They're basically trying to set up a software program for creating kind of your own jurisdictions and creating your own identity to act within a marketplace. So you can create your own companies and buy and sell goods and act under an identity that you have complete control over. And you can create multiple identities as well. That's going to be called Cambrian. They actually just secured the domain, so we can actually talk about the name. The code name was kind of Decentralized City. It's which gives kind of a good overview of what it would be. And so the idea for that is to sort of get a bunch of test cases out in the wild, just accessing people that are interested in working in a free market environment on the internet. And then once they work out all the kinks in the software, to sort of use it for the free cities, so they can have their have a piece of software, have a way to sort of self-regulate without being just like thrown in this area with no regulation, nothing to kind of go after. And another thing I'm actually really excited about that I heard about at the conference, I've heard about it, I read about it a few weeks ago, was Made Safe. They're doing decentralized data storage. So they're basically trying to do what Bitcoin does to banks, but to big data servers, like, putting all of your information on Google Docs and all of that stuff. So It seems like a really complicated process. They've actually been working on it under the hood for I think they said 8 years. But they're kind of coming out now, kind of trying to promote it a little bit, trying to get developers around the API that they're working on. Mm-hmm. And I heard their talk yesterday, which was really awesome and inspiring. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And Brian, you host Sovryn Tech, right?
Absolutely. So I got to speak at the conference. Got cut a little brief, but...
tell me more about that.
Oh, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
No, I mean, tell me about your talk. What did you speak about at the conference?
My talk was essentially, in short, it was that nothing has any actual value when you get to the end of the line. And so you might as well use anything. Because there's as money. Because there's so many people, and I'm talking about currencies in particular. Obviously, there's things that have value. People add value to your life just by, embracing them in your circle, things like that. But... just currency in general, nothing really holds, the idea of a store of value. I talked about the 4 properties of money, and that all of those are pretty much nonsense. I understand, the purpose for them, but anything can fill those roles. And the idea of subjective value, that as soon as you accept value as being subjective, as in it's based upon your own personal interest in the item that you're using as a medium of exchange, intrinsic value goes out the door. It doesn't matter whether it has that or not. So, because there's a lot of people who still, maybe some of them were attending this conference, who think that gold is somehow worth something, when, it's not at all. It has no store of value, doesn't exist. None of these arguments for it exist. In fact, I brought up the case of the cowrie shell, which actually smokes gold as far as value, as far as length of use. And so all those people who think that, Bitcoin isn't based on anything, guess what? Nothing's based on anything. So you might as well use Bitcoin, because at least it integrates well with the world that we live in.
The poor cowries, I mean.
Yeah.
Keep taking their shells.
I know, those little mollusks. They just keep losing their shells. But those shells can last. I didn't know a lot of this until recently, but those shells can last 100 years. With they're solid, sturdy stuff. So, who knows? Everybody talks about, gold's invincible. Yeah, well, so is the cowrie shell.
Well, I think the intrinsic theory of value should be called the religious approach to currency.
Exactly. You got it. Yeah. I like that. I'm going to use that next time I give that talk.
I also like that you added, the whole part about the... Bitcoin monogamists. And,
see, this is where Justus and I are going to disagree.
Yay!
I think that's a good point. I view currency as a protocol for exchanging price information.
Right.
And information protocols are not an area where you need competition. There's this idea, especially in libertarian circles, that competition is good. More competition is better, therefore the most competition is the best. But that is not true that's not true for everything that you could possibly throw under the competition umbrella. Forcing people to use a standard is bad. I mean,
you're right.
Of course. But it's the force that's bad. It's not unified standards that are bad. If we look in the world, we have 2 competing standards for length and mass and those kind of measurements, the imperial and the metric. Mm-hmm. So if we were to look at a possible future world where we don't have this, we could either have more standards or less. And I'm pretty sure that you're going to have, it'd be hard to make a case that more ways to measure mass, 3, 5, 10 ways to measure mass, is better than having just the kilogram or just the pound. Because unified standards for information transfer reduce friction. Instead of having to negotiate and figure out what everybody means, then you just use a common language, and you can focus on the actual data and not the protocol.
I can accept all of that. I just think software, which Bitcoin essentially is, software standards do have a different set of rules. And I feel the case I brought up was Microsoft Office. And Word Microsoft in particular in the 80s had a principle called embrace and expand. And they pretty much bought out all the competition. Thing is, when they bought out the competition, like the grammar checkers, the spell checking software, all these different things. I mean, Word in itself, okay, initially was a mess up. It was a mistake from the get go because it took stylized. There's two types. There's a long history behind this, but anyway, with Word, okay, at the time you had two different. In the 80s, you had two different styles of document presentation getting developed. There's the one that's very, very common in scientific circles using markup language, where like you're literally telling the printer, with almost looks like HTML code, where you're saying this is going to be italics, this is going to be this. Okay, now Xerox, Xerox Star and Apple and all of them, they made that process very simple. Okay, but then there was the other way that was being developed by other companies like Lotus, who were doing an overall style, not where it was like you set this for this, but it's called hierarchical document presentation. Okay, and these two styles, these two methods of processing a document are actually antithetical to each other. And Word tried to be both, and it failed because these don't work well together. Okay, it's oil and water. So anyway, they did that, and then they started bringing in everything else. They tried to be everything, and in trying to be everything, they kept. The example I gave is just try using the grammar checker in Word today. If private companies could still, if it was still worth their salt to do grammar checking, I mean, people could probably write books with having very little knowledge of the English language by now, I would assume. And so I think in software, you have standards. When you have these standards, they can do a lot more harm than good. And I think we could be much farther along. I mean, Office is just is a monolithic monster that holds. We can't even. I don't even think it can be calculated how much that's holding things back. The internet, HTML is pretty much what the internet ran on. HTML was such a loose standard that I think it's what allowed the internet to really become what it was. And there's a lot of other cases like this. So I feel like software standards follow a different rule. But I overall, I think you're right. Though admittedly, we had a Let's Talk Bitcoin meetup today, and Justus showed up an hour late. So I don't know about those. I don't know about those time standards.
I agree with you that Microsoft Office is terrible.
Right.
And extend and
embrace
extend. Is terrible. But the elephant in the room that you're leaving out is copyright. That's what enabled Microsoft to do their damage, which did not affect HTML. See, if Microsoft could not use police power to stop other people from using their standard, adding to it, innovating, they would not be able to just impose a crappy standard on everybody. Then there's the fact, like in the particular case of Microsoft, most of their revenue comes from government contracts. So their prevalence in the marketplace has always been subsidized by the fact that they had the better lobbyists to get all the government contracts. So the fact that Microsoft, a company that has been in bed with the federal government pretty much since its inception, was able to create crappy standards does not show that the principle of standardization is bad. It just means that copyright is bad, and state-enforced subsidized monopolies are bad.
I agree; those are all bad. I think there's other examples that could be given that we could go down. But
the other thing is, not everything has to be standardized, but some things do. When you're talking about a globally recognized asset ledger, everybody has to agree on the same thing. If you're talking about, I can't even come up with a good counterexample right now, but there can be walled gardens that don't need to communicate with the outside world, where a global standard doesn't really benefit them that much, but there are other areas where the global standard is useful, like IP, Internet Protocol, IP,
TCP/IP.
Even the lowest level, even without TCP/IP, because there's other protocols that run on besides TCP/IP. But the Internet Protocol is what makes the Internet so useful, because every device on the Internet agrees to that protocol. Now, applications don't have to use TCP. They can use UDP or even a few others that are even less common. But IP is what lets everything on every device connected to the internet talk to every other device.
Okay, but in a post-Snowden revelation world, I want 20 internets. I want, I want all those different networks, because it seems like having that centralized, like ICANN is a problem. That's why NAMECOIN was partly developed, was to answer the ICANN issue. I'm not saying Bitcoin has that, but to some degree I am, because the Bitcoin Foundation feels an awful lot like ICANN.
Well, there's two different issues there. ICANN, the organization, versus the DNS protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Those are different things, and fracturing the internet into 20 networks that can't talk to each other except through proxies is that's the ultimate cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Right, but like take something like Ethereum or even BitShares, and I mean we can get into the finer points of where those might be problematic, but that's their baseline, is that we are going to interconnect all these different blockchains. That's kind of their point. And like I said, we can disagree. We can agree to disagree.
We can agree. Well, I'm mainly thinking, are they actually going to be able to achieve what they claim?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, like NextCoin can already, their clients can natively handle, oddly enough, Dogecoin along with Next at the same time, and they have an asset exchange. I mean, so it seems possible, but yeah, we got to wait and see. I agree.
So if there were, say, 20 different internets, wouldn't from the start, wouldn't the focus then be on making those proxies work, innovate so that they work very well between each other?
The thing is, we've already seen that world. Prior to the World Wide Web becoming a common thing in the 90s, we had the world of 20 internets. And as soon as everybody saw the World Wide Web, they dumped that shit. I don't know what the target audience of this podcast is. But,
I make the rules here.
Okay. We had bulletin board systems. Every town would have 3 or 4 independent bulletin board systems. They were all their own little walled gardens. There were the national bulletin boards. There was the Genie, the CompuServe, the America Online, the Microsoft Network. And they were all their own walled gardens. There were proxies. There was the thing called FidoNet, which was a bunch of independent bulletin boards agreeing to pass messages back and forth, and it would take 3 days for a reply on a discussion thread to make it from the United States to England and back, because everybody with their dial-up modems at night would call hubs, and they'd coordinate these things, and you would have people who would arbitrage shareware files between bulletin boards. You'd download it from one bulletin board, upload it to another one. And this whole world of proxies and separate networks that were loosely coupled existed, and the market doesn't want that, because the web came and everyone was like, oh, you mean I can just send a message to an email address and it doesn't matter what their ISP is and they'll just receive it. Cool, I want this. And it was amazingly rapid how quickly that world of the multiple internets went away. I mean, it was overnight they were gone, because the power of a unified network that everybody can talk to everyone else on is just so overwhelming.
I think I get your point. I think that attitude is that the market is changing to where the market is wanting to maybe even go back to that. I think there's a lot of people who are terrified of how Google is literally encompassing everything that you do.
And you keep mixing layers here, though.
Okay.
I mean, Google, people could go away from Google and have separate emails, but they're all going to speak SMTP.
Mm-hmm.
SMTP is the underlying unifying factor. When you talk about going away from to separate networks, I'm thinking of in the past where when cell phones first came out, you could only call people who used the same carrier as you.
Right.
There was no when SMS messaging was first introduced, it was only Verizon customers could SMS other Verizon customers. But that's not what people want. People want to be able to send an SMS to anyone. Mm-hmm. Now, SMS is a protocol, invoking the evil empire again. Through Google Voice, you can get an SMS right to your browser. That's the trend, though. When you're talking about communication, people don't want to be restricted in their communication to this little sharded network. They want open lines to everyone. That's how the markets always tend. Now, even Google, for all the the evil of Gmail, they still didn't tamper with IMAP and SMTP. That still works. You can they haven't walled off their Gmail so that you can only send messages to other Gmail users, because nobody would want that.
Right, but wouldn't you make the case that, say, SMTP, a lot of these things, email in particular, I mean, yes, you can input PGP, GPG, whatever, but when these things get accepted, goes back to the Microsoft Word thing, and I understand the point about the government intervention, but also there's plenty of people, and Microsoft pulled some pretty scammy stuff that I don't think required the government at all, that really forced it down people's throats, just like they did with Internet Explorer. I think that's pretty fair. Netscape didn't do enough to really combat it, but it's pretty fair that that Microsoft for quite a while has been putting, again, ramming stuff down people's throats. But in accepting these standards, people aren't thinking, what more can we do? Like, don't you feel that software, and I'm only talking about software standards. I understand, I agree. Like, having, unified time standards, all that stuff is great. Okay, but software standards in particular, I feel I feel there's very, very different rules, and that as soon as you have standards, people stop thinking outside of the box, and they stop thinking about what can I do more, with this.
I was just wondering, Justus, if you're saying that people want centralized, not necessarily centralized, but people want standardized technologies so that they can not have barriers to use within those technologies, then applying that to Bitcoin and altcoins, which is like the original part of this conversation, won't altcoins just fade away because people won't want to use them? I mean, I think right now it seems like people do want to use altcoins for whatever reason. At least some people do.
I think in the long term that would be the case. And I would describe what people want is connectivity. They don't want a standard. Nobody thinks I want a standard. They want the ability to trade or communicate with everybody without barriers. What I see in altcoins right now is people want to mint money. It is not surprising to me that we have this rush of altcoins right now, because the very reason why we need Bitcoin describes the same phenomenon. The Austrian economists have been saying this for a long time. You can't trust human beings with the printing press. That's why they wanted a gold standard, because the ability to print money is very addictive and corrupting. Unfortunately, the only way to get a new currency into circulation is it has to be printed somehow. So now we have digital printing presses, and everybody, just because it's individuals doing it and not governments, doesn't make the rush of being able to print your own money any less addictive. So yes, altcoins are not being driven, though, by merchants who want there to be 10,000 ways for their customers to pay them. It's being driven by people who want to mine and speculators who want to get in on the next thing. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not sustainable in the long term. The fact that people want to mint a currency is not what drives whether or not it will be adopted in the marketplace and stick around.
But you don't think there are any altcoins that do things that Bitcoin doesn't do, that may be a barrier that they can get around?
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Oh, maybe the Zero Coin whenever it launches. If we're talking about these as purely as software projects, then great. Yeah, start up experimental projects, tinker with them, and then let's merge the functionality into Bitcoin. If the altcoin community was advertising it as that, I'd have nothing. I wouldn't even talk about altcoin. I'd be like, yeah, go invent new different ways of doing transactions, innovate, and let's pull all once we figure out what works, let's all pull this into the unified network. But altcoins are all about, this is going to be the next big thing. One of these days, one of these is going to be at parity with the Bitcoin. You better get in now and buy some. You can be the next person who spent $1 and then becomes a multimillionaire. That's what I hear from altcoins.
I think you're right. There's a lot of people who like MaxCoin is ridiculous. Okay, now I mean, and you get into something like AURORACOIN, and I'm like, okay, well, this could be an interesting, experiment in politics, but not. Its purpose is, not to work with a lot of these altcoins, like you said. Their purpose is not to work with Bitcoin. I do think, though, that there's at least a few, and generally, oddly enough, they're the ones that are the most interesting, or ironically, they do say they want to work with Bitcoin. And I mean, I think Ethereum came right out and said that they were interested in working with Bitcoin. BitShares has already talked about wanting to attach to Bitcoin. LITECOIN, the dev teams themselves, have said that they work very closely with the Bitcoin dev teams to create a mutually beneficial relationship. And also, and like I mentioned with Next, Next is being designed right now to be able to, with their asset exchange and their clients, to work with other coins natively. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, like I don't have any problem with the LITECOIN developers.
Right.
They're great people.
Yep. What
I have a problem with is the LITECOIN pumpers and dumpers, and the same with all the other cryptocurrencies. That's really that they're the ones who are just pumping out bullshit, but they're the most vocal, and every day there's a new. I don't know. We should keep graphs of how many new altcoins are launched every day.
Well, I just learned today that Ripple, apparently, you can create your own currency with Ripple inside of like 2 minutes.
Oh, there are websites where you can put in like what features you want it to have and have like pop out some code where you create your own coin.
Yeah, see, a lot of those coins, I mean, my own theory is you either have to have a feature set or an infrastructure. An easy way to get an infrastructure is to attach it to Bitcoin somehow, because Bitcoin has a huge infrastructure. But I mean, you got to have that. So really, you got to have that feature set. You can get in the infrastructure probably pretty easily, but you got to have one of those two things. But a lot of these altcoins, admittedly, I agree, they don't have either. And they don't want it. Oddly enough,
I heard someone joke that they should start a new altcoin whose proof of work function was the creation of other altcoins.
Proof of alt.
Yeah.
God, wow.
Well, there's also the idea of companies using altcoins for their IPO kind of thing too.
That's barely even started.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that.
What do you think about that in terms of...
It's an interesting idea.
He said that very softly.
I don't want this to be a podcast about me bashing everything, but yeah.
Well, I mean, it does have sort of that flavor of like, we want to create money from nothing.
Yeah. And what I've seen in the whole cryptocurrency ecosystem over the last, say, 4 years, there's a lot of people who don't understand, they have no epistemology of technology. Everything is a black box to them. They're like, oh, Bitcoin is this magic black box that worked. And they can't see inside it. They don't have any framework to say, well, okay, what was different about Bitcoin than what came in the past? Why does it work now? Why did these things that didn't work? What was different about them that made them not work? They don't do this analysis. They're like, oh, magic happened. Here's some other thing. Maybe the magic will happen again. And so they just throw a bunch of ideas together, and we can throw it in buzzwords. You can say, oh, well, this is decentralized. This is more decentralized. Therefore, maybe it has more of the magic. And there's no analysis. There's no evaluation. And when everything is a magic black box, then people will they'll put it all on the same level, right? There's no way to say, well, these ideas are plausible and these are not, when it's all magic. And I see that, I think that's part of the altcoin thing. They're like, well, Bitcoin was the magic black box that came out of nowhere. Therefore, this altcoin that I created by filling in parameters on a website and clicking submit, maybe it'll have the same magic too. You never know.
Well, it's an interesting thing, I think, because, and I've yet to hear, and at this conference, there were fantastic economic minds present. And I've yet to hear anyone really address, especially from the Austrian school, which, I think most of them probably subscribe to, and to some degree I do as well. You never hear them discuss, like with digital media, like an MP3. You never hear them talk about the fact that an MP3 takes pretty much, in my opinion, takes every market theory and just tosses it right out the door. Like anything that Bastiat ever wrote, all this stuff, it doesn't exist anymore. Because millions of people could have this billions of people, and an unlimited amount of people could have an MP3 for free. And I mean nothing really gets done now.
The music file it doesn't refute economics. It's outside the scope of economics.
Yeah.
You only need economics when you're trying to allocate things that only one person can use at a time. I mean, a house on a specific piece of land is scarce. And scarce doesn't mean that there's not a lot of it. It means it's exclusive.
Right. But
music is not scarce. If you hear a song and I hear it, my hearing it does not impede your hearing it. So we don't need economics to allocate the listening to of songs.
Right, but Bitcoin doesn't have to be... I mean, Bitcoin itself has to be scarce. Cryptocurrencies don't have to be scarce. And this is my concern, is that the only way that economists seem to address the digital age is that it's not theft. And it's not theft. That logically, copying a file, nobody lost anything. That does not fall under the definition of theft. Okay? But that's all they will say about it. They won't say the fact that, literally we really are creating something out of practically nothing. It's not magic, like you said. There's an understanding of how all this works. But there's no minds describing this. And on a long enough timeline, I wonder what kind of animal is going to come out of this. Because, I mean, we can't really make digital food right now. We don't have replicators. But for the first time, we're really seeing that we're seeing examples of a post-scarcity world. Okay? I mean, that's just my opinion on it, and no one's talking about it yet, and the conversation should be had.
You look like you want to say something about the post-scarcity
world.
Yeah,
that doesn't feel right, but I can't quite articulate what's not right about it.
Well, because in a post-scarcity world, money goes away.
Right. There are some things that are not scarce. Like information is not scarce. Mm-hmm. If I know how to do something and you know how to do it, there's no scarcity there. A bigger part of our production. Okay, when we talk about us in the G7 countries, let's say, a small fraction of what we have to work for is meeting our immediate needs, and we can devote a lot of our time and energy to information-based things that are not scarce. So in that sense, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, the access to information isn't scarce anymore. That used to be a scarcity in itself. I mean, Gutenberg kind of changed that, but now it's on steroids. Now there's nothing stopping. Anybody
who wants to, access to publishing the barrier is so low that you could almost call that non-scarce. Anybody can make a video and upload it to YouTube.
And you have unlimited copies that can be made of these things in the digital world. So, I wonder how that's going to end up looking. Because again, my original point of my talk at this conference was that nothing, there's no currency, there's no such thing as a store of value. And in that case, what becomes of money when suddenly when money in itself is no longer scarce? I mean, the gold standard is a ridiculous thing to go back to. There is no point in that. And that has to just stop people arguing for that.
I agree with you. One of these blog posts that I've never been outraged enough to finish was I tried to do a simplified example to describe what is the purpose of currency, which I think maybe I'll share it with you and you guys can see what you think about it. So imagine the four of us get on a plane and we're going to go to Hong Kong. And in the middle of the flight, engines all burst into flames and the airplane crashes. There are only 4 survivors, which are conveniently enough us. We're on a island.
Great gene pool.
Isolated island out in the middle of the Pacific. We're not going to be found for decades, 30, 40, 50 years. We're lucky, though. We can survive on this island, and it's actually fairly easy to survive.
This sounds like a porn, not a blog post.
Maybe that's why I haven't had the motivation to finish it. I'm thinking about it the wrong way. Okay. Well, let's finish the economic side, and maybe we can explore this alternative later. The only job we have to do to survive on this island is gather food. That's that. And it's easy to do, but it's kind of tedious and boring. And it's easily possible for one person to gather enough food in a given day for more than what they need. So, right, given those conditions, we have a choice. We could all go out and gather our food each day, or we could take turns taking the day off and let someone else do it for us. And with 4 people, you wouldn't need any good way to keep track of it. You could just remember, right? I'll do it today, I'll gather 2 units worth of food, and I'll share it with you, and then tomorrow you do it for me. And we could do this, and that would go on fine for a while, but it wouldn't last forever, because we wouldn't remember. And we're like, I don't feel well today. Why don't I take 2 days off, and then I'll spot you 2 days? Like, well, I owe you a day, and can you do her? It would it would
break down.
Yeah, it would break down
pretty fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we would need some objective reference to keep track of.
You need a ledger.
A ledger. You need a ledger, and it wouldn't matter what you use for the ledger. Like what you were saying before, we could find 4 rocks or like 4 pieces of coconut tree bark, anything, as long as it's objective or an objective reference. And whenever somebody gathers extra food and gives it to someone else, the person who took the day off gives up one of their pieces of bark. And if we need more granularity in accounting, we could split them into smaller pieces so we have more to deal with. But the only purpose this bark serves is the ledger. Whose turn is it to work? Who can take the day off? That's all it's for. And for a ledger does have to be global for it to be useful. Like, we can't all keep our own ledgers on our own rules and use them to come to an agreement when it comes to the determining the task of whose turn is it to gather the food. So that was my basic example of currency as a ledger.
Unless, of course, we could, like you said, if we had our own rules, if those rules could be contrasted and compared uniformly, then you wouldn't need one.
Then you've just obfuscated the fact that you have one ledger. Well, okay, the first example was we all had our own ledgers. We were keeping it in our heads, and we couldn't reconcile them. The objective rules to reconcile the separate ledgers was the pieces of bark or pretty rocks or whatever we chose to use. And this example is also how I'm trying to point out that issuing new currency is a necessary evil at best, right? The purpose is the ledger, to keep track of whose turn it is to work. Let's say we're using rocks, and then I find a hole in the ground that has a bunch of these rocks, well, I'm just going to take these rocks and then give them out and then never gather any food. And I'm not providing any value. I'm not gathering the food. I'm just stealing free labor from everyone else. Mm-hmm. And that is what issuing new currency does. The problem here is, for a currency to start existing, it has to be issued. Now, in our simplified example with just 4 people, we could issue all the currency units at once to everyone equally. And I see that as really the optimal way to start a new currency. Is everybody who will ever use this currency gets issued an equal amount all at once and never again. Logistically, we can't do that. It would have been great in 2009 if we could have said, okay, world, all 11 or 7 billion people these days? All 7 billion people, let's get together. We're all going to have 1 Bitcoin. And it's going to be issued in 1 unit, and it's divisible to 12 decimal places, whatever it is, and then never again will Bitcoins be issued. That would have been the perfect way to introduce it into circulation. Mm-hmm. Nobody gets the advantage of being the first spender, because we're all the first spenders. We couldn't do it logistically. Next, I think, tried to do that, but their pool wasn't big enough. I mean, maybe...
Yeah, they still have a lot left over, and now they're dividing it in different ways.
Yeah,
but this is what AURORACOIN is doing.
Yeah.
AURORACOIN
only for the population of Iceland.
Right, 50% for the population of Iceland. So, but why would the scale necessarily change?
Well, they also, AURORACOIN, didn't they have like 50% pre-mined and 50% will be mined?
The 50% pre-mined is what's going to every Icelander.
The way I see this issuance, it's these partially mined over time. I don't see how that's better than Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin, it balanced the incentives so that the early adopters had a reason to start this untested concept. And while the transaction rate is still low, we don't have enough transactions in Bitcoin to support the network on user fees. and that'll only happen over time as more people use it. The ideal is the network is paid for. It's pay to play. You create transactions, so you pay for that, and that's what supports the infrastructure. Just like the people who buy the groceries are the ones who pay for the food distribution infrastructure. We can't have it's a chicken and the egg problem though. Until enough people are using it, you can't get the volume to support the network.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I see the Bitcoin mining as it's the least bad thing we could have done to get started. The only incremental improvements, though, are not interesting. Like, if you found a way tomorrow to say, we're going to issue to all 7 billion people a currency and nobody gets a mining reward, and we've all agreed as a human species to all switch, that is a big enough improvement over Bitcoin mining that I would go for that. But that's where I put the goalpost.
So somebody actually proposed something like this where the person, I don't exactly know the details, but it was something where it was in people's DNA. That was the private key was encoded by their DNA or something like that. And so every new person that was born would get one DNA coin or whatever, and every person that existed would have one DNA coin also.
Did it require a central authority to adjudicate that, or?
No, I don't think so. But I mean, I don't know how you would go easily from biometric information like DNA into a private key or a hash or whatever.
Yeah. And what about chimeras? How would that work for them?
That's a good point. Yeah, that would be an unusual situation, but sure, they might get two.
Well. And that's still introducing more currency units into circulation over time.
Right, because, I mean, assuming the world population grows, right?
But even if it doesn't grow...
Yeah, if you spend it before you die, then there's more currency, right?
We wouldn't expect that people would die and take all of their savings with them. Well, it would depend. If they tend to hold more or less than what they were born with when they die, but... Mm-hmm. I just still don't like the idea of issuing more with each new person that's born, because they're getting resources from their parents anyway until they're earning them in the marketplace.
Is that what AURORACOIN is doing?
I'm not sure.
Do you know?
No, I'm not sure on that end. If there's going to be anything like in the future, I don't think so. I don't think that's what they're doing. As I understand it, that the 50% is actually it will only address 96% of the population. So there's 4%
because it's only everyone
missing.
who's on the internet.
Right.
Okay.
That's how they're proving it. So yeah, I don't think that's part of the program with the AURORACOIN. But could be wrong.
Do they have like an age limit? I wonder like how they're handling minor people.
Not sure on that. We
like,
still got, as of this recording, I think 20 days before this happens.
Yeah.
So,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And do people have to opt in and claim it, or do they get it somehow?
I think they just get it. It's an airdrop. That's the way they're describing it, is as an airdrop.
They still have to contact someone to get their private keys.
Sure.
So they do have to know about it and claim it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what the whole 50% mining thing was, to sort of build up interest by people in Iceland about the currency. So there is actual it's going to be worth something by the time the airdrop comes. So they might as well.
I heard it was bubbling or something.
Yeah,
it
definitely
went
is
above the value of LITECOIN or something.
Yeah.
Well, because only a very, very tiny amount of them are currently trading.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy. It's easy if you stretch the definition of in circulation, you can really bump up the market cap.
Right.
Yeah.
If there's only a tiny amount circulating, but you pretend that these non-circulating ones are part of your market cap, you can make that graph shoot up really high. It doesn't mean anything in objective terms, though.
So one question I wanted to ask before, but there wasn't really a place to jump in with it, was some people say that, of course, if Bitcoin gets co-opted somehow, bad developers or whatever, or it just gets way too statist, or it's tracking everything, it's coin validation and stuff, that we should be ready to jump ship to an altcoin, essentially. Justus, do you think there's value in having altcoins ready and available so that it's possible to do that if necessary?
Right. Yeah, I already said that as software projects, I support altcoins. Mm-hmm. If there was some I would jump to an altcoin if Bitcoin was just unretrievably compromised. If there was just no way to fix it, of course I would jump. But I think I don't want that like last ditch effort, escape plan to take away from efforts to keep Bitcoin from being co-opted and to work to push the bad actors out of the community, right? Because
you want to save the marriage. You don't want to get divorced yet.
Right. If
you're going to try everything you can.
It's an issue of motivation. Like, I would rather that people not think about that option of the altcoin, because then they will have more urgency to not let Bitcoin get co-opted. If we're just all going to jump ship, then they'll co-opt Bitcoin, and then they'll co-opt whatever we jumped to, and then they'll co-opt the next one. I mean, I would rather we're going to take the stand, and we're not going to let it get co-opted. And anybody who tries, we will just push them out of the community. And I think that's happening to Bitcoin Foundation right now. Certainly in its current the way it's currently constituted, I see lots of people jumping ship. Maybe I'm only viewing a tiny section of the community, but they're, from what I can see, they're just hemorrhaging credibility. So if they're going to be used as a tool to co-opt Bitcoin, they're not going to be an effective one much longer.
I hope that happens. I mean, myself, with Bitcoin, I think there's features that we know now, some of which, Justus, you talked about at this conference, multi-sig, open transactions, all this stuff, that if they can be implemented elsewhere quicker and somehow still connect to the Bitcoin network, I'm interested in that possibility. In that, now, if the Bitcoin Foundation gets pushed away, my feelings on Bitcoin might change quite a bit, because they're, to my mind, they're like the number one problem with Bitcoin. So, there's these features that can happen now. They're not happening now, and so I am intrigued by altcoins that are implementing them. And I like when they can communicate in between, like Justus was talking about. That's kind of my thoughts on it. Are they going to come after the next coin? Or not, I don't mean next as an NXT. Are they going to go after the next blockchain if we jump ship? Yeah, probably. But I think there's going to be a point where some kind of software could be figured out that would just completely, it would just make them so meaningless to even try. And I question whether or not Bitcoin has the stamina and the coding stuff to be the coin that can allow for that. That's just my thought on it.
Can I plug BTCD here?
Absolutely. I love those guys.
Because I think you're right about the current... I'm going to have to badmouth people here, aren't I? I think you're right about the current core dev team. There are a lot of them, well, all of them except Jeff Garzik and Gavin are unpaid volunteers. They're not all working I've heard rumors that I can't confirm because I don't know personally. I've heard rumors of interpersonal disagreements between them. I think, some of those have been public. So they don't work well together as a team despite their individual abilities. They're not all that effective as a software dev team. That's not to say that the specific members are not skilled coders,
sure,
but the team is not effective. Now we have conformal systems with, they really are the professionals. They're the adults in the room.
I agree, yeah.
Everything, these are OpenBSD people for the most part. OpenBSD has a reputation of being meticulous and
solid,
professional, engineered. And that exact same software development style exists in the conformal team, and they're bringing it to Bitcoin. They haven't gotten nearly enough recognition for what they do, and I think that's going to change pretty soon, hopefully.
I hope so, too. That's the thing, too. Those guys in particular are doing such beautiful code that Bitcoin really needs, in my opinion.
Yeah. And hopefully their involvement will improve the reference client. I don't know, these two, the conformal coders and the reference client coders are not talking to each other right now. Ideally, they should be. And we've already seen instances of some of the features that they developed are making its way into the reference client. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the rivalry will be healthy. Maybe it's kind of like there's competition on the scene, we need to up our game. Maybe that will bring some improvement to the reference client. We'll see, but I feel much better about the future of Bitcoin knowing that there is a credible replacement for the reference implementation now. I mean, I was, like you, I was feeling existential fears about Bitcoin, say 6 months ago, before I really knew about BTCD. And having, two of them are local to Austin, so I've been able to talk with them, I've been able to see what they're working on, and my confidence in the future of the Bitcoin as a currency has gone up dramatically.
Do they have like sort of a mission to merge their code?
Well, their code's written in a different language.
Okay.
They develop in Go.
Okay.
They wrote they're eating their own dog food here. So they wanted to launch a Bitcoin business.
Right.
And so before they did that, they wanted a stable Bitcoin client to work off of. So they wrote it. They spent a year writing it, and they're giving it to the community as open source software, and that's what they use to run their CoinVoice business. So it's a very admirable position. Like they had a business they wanted to run. The software they needed didn't exist yet. So rather than wing it, they spent a year of their investors' money to write the code, released it. Now they are launching their real business. I can't express how impressed I am by them.
So is this like, I heard someone say yesterday, when there was just one internet browser, people thought that was the internet, essentially. And now there's not just, Internet Explorer or Netscape or whatever, there's Firefox and Chrome and everything else.
Yes, that's very much like what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people were introduced to the internet when Windows 95 integrated Internet Explorer. And Internet Explorer was kind of crappy for a long time. But the competition from Firefox and Chrome and Safari is actually, I haven't used Internet Explorer recently, but I've heard it's gotten quite a bit better because they have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
But does that fall under the discussion about standards and all these different browsers that work differently?
But they all speak the same HTML.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So like BTCD and BitcoinD reach the in order for BTC to be correct, it has to reach the exact same consensus as BitcoinD. So there are two different ways of arriving at the exact same global ledger.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but there are websites you can only visit through Tor.
Right. That is a case of breaking the model a little bit of the endpoint to endpoint nature of the internet.
Mm-hmm. And also developing for websites, there is kind of like a separation when you have to keep in mind for Internet Explorer and stuff, and there is software to help kind of parse through all the CSS and just do all the work for you, so you don't necessarily have to like write in the code for each individual browser.
And that was a problem that before Internet Explorer, all the browsers were standards compliant, and then Microsoft did its expand and extend. Mm-hmm. Why do I keep getting this phrase wrong?
Expand and embrace.
Embrace and extend, and they broke the internet. There was the website may still exist, WASP Web Standards Project, but they caused like a revolt in the web developer world that Microsoft broke the standard. They created the situation where you had to write websites differently for different browsers, which defeated the whole purpose of HTML. I mean, and the situation has been slowly improving over time as Microsoft lost its monopoly. It's getting to the point where HTML5 can be write once, run anywhere.
I guess my point is more the fact that there was software and technology to help that the differences, even though they are changing to conform to the rest of the browsers. There is software out there to kind of make it so that if they didn't, you could still work with it.
The slight difference is in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very unique in that sense. The network breaks if the standards are slightly different. Like, it forks the code. The blockchain, you'll have different parts of the network agreeing on different blocks as being current, and that just causes complete chaos. So we'll never be able to have that situation of the fragmentation that you were talking about, because you remember last March when the 0.8 nodes did not agree with the 0.7 and below nodes, and that was a catastrophe that had to fix right the F now. And
that's okay.
Okay. I mean, it was like literally waking people up at night, phone calls. We got to fix this right now. So that's kind of cool, and it makes it harder to develop software for, because the tolerance for differences between implementations is zero. But on the other hand, we'll never get that situation because we have to do it the same way.
Yeah, I'm still feeling like I want, be it through exchanges like Trixie or something. I'm wanting these multiple coins because, especially with the conversation as it stands right now, you have W3CS web standards, essentially that. In fact, the head guy of that talked at a Bitcoin conference back in New York recently. And these guys are pretty much, they're doing the open standards, okay? And yet these open standards, that everybody's supposed to love, and like Firefox implementing all the time, and everything's nice and open source, are implementing easier forms of putting in DRM. We just found out about that about a month ago. And that's disconcerting, because this is the group that's supposed to be making these internet standards, these web standards. And right now, they're doing something, that philosophically goes against their core nature, their core existence of why that organization even exists. And so I want another standards team, working on things. And this is, in fact, it's ironic, because it seems like the story you told about with Internet Explorer, with Microsoft, history's repeating itself to where they're going to break the internet, if this keeps on. So I'm still feeling like I want those other standards to exist. I know you're saying you're open to them as far as being experiments, but I'm wanting things to be a lot more serious, that exist out there. So
I think this goes back to the other point about motivation. Who pays the W3C's bills? Whose life savings are on the line if they break the internet? Well, for Bitcoin, for people who are all in on Bitcoin, that raises the urgency to make sure that it's not broken. The stakeholders are arranged differently. Like regular people who use these web browsers, the DRM doesn't affect them personally, other than that it might be the difference between whether or not Netflix works in their browser with or without Flash. Because really, that's what they see. There aren't millions of people whose life savings is in open HTML with no DRM who are going to raise an outcry.
This is a case I make for LITECOIN, in that yes, I want Bitcoin to have new features now, but at the same time, fine, I understand you want to do this stuff in a test net, but let's do it for real, where real money is on the line, like with LITECOIN, to develop new features but I mean, that goes back to your point of having experiments, I guess, to where you can test out these features, but I think I'm wanting them to just always be available as a serious, not alternative is an unfair term, because some of these guys are doing completely their own code. And I mean, really, LITECOIN can't even say that, I suppose. So that's just my thought on it. Is for people are looking for a security blanket. That's part of what standards are about, is having a security blanket in what you do. I think, and I understand that, but my desire for a security blanket comes from having options, not from having a closed off system that's secure. So, and that's just my opinion on the matter.
Is there anything else anyone wants to add? I thought that was a great discussion about
Yeah.
standardization and
Yeah, I
Bitcoin
agree.
monogamy, and that's what Brian calls it. Does anyone want to talk about that?
Somehow, why is it with you two that the adjectives always tend in a certain direction? I'm having the conversation always drifts a certain way.
Value is subjective, and you are finding what the subject is about.
Yeah, we're a bunch of perverts. That's basically what it's all about. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much. Does everybody want to plug their stuff? So if this makes it onto some podcast, then everybody will know where to find us. Let's go with Justus first.
I'm on Twitter at Justus Ranvier. You mentioned my blog, bitcoinism.blogspot.com. Maybe one of these days I'll get a better URL for it. But as of now, I'm the only Justus Ranvier on the internet. So if you search for that name, anything that comes up is
Justus.
Justus Ranvier.
Cool. It is a unique name.
So my Twitter handle is V for voluntary. That's VEE, and then the word for, and then voluntary. I am in a transition. I currently work at Open Garden, and they're a really great company, so you can check them out at opengarden.com. But I'm also looking to do things for myself as well. I do currently have the domain iopt.io, but there's nothing there. But I plan to put something there.
That's a cool domain.
Yeah. I just wanted to get it.
Yeah. And you are Paige, of course.
And I am Paige, yes.
And of course, to find me, you can go to sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com, as I am Brian Sovryn. And you can find links to Twitter and wherever else there. And you can, of course, check out my show, 2 hours a week. Some of the most original thoughts I guarantee you're ever going to hear on the internet.
I can vouch for that.
Thank you.
Totally true. And I am Stephanie Murphy. You'll find me on Let's Talk Bitcoin at letstalkbitcoin.com. Also, Brian and I host another show called Sex and Science Hour. That appears on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network and on the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast feed. And we both have like about a dozen other projects, so I'll probably stop plugging stuff there and just leave you with Let's Talk Bitcoin. Cool. Thanks so much. This has been really fun. Now we're going to go do something even more fun. And we'll let you guess what that is. Oh my.
This has been Sovryn Tech. Visit us at sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. There you can connect with us, see more of what you've heard on today's show, and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is open source. We encourage you to share. Later, nerds.